Please tell me that this is some sort of sick joke. Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje for the interim title? Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing right now is Dana White's ego and personal vendetta getting in the way of the sport we love and who should be fighting who. It is a travesty that Arman Tsarukyan is not fighting for the belt. Hey, listen, I got nothing against Paddy Pimblett and Justin Gaethje. They're great fighters and maybe they could build their way up to a rightful title shot. But Arman Tsarukyan has to be fighting for the interim belt.
Conor McGregor stunned a lot of people when he took to social media and loudly backed Paddy Pimblett ahead of UFC 324, openly picking the Liverpool star to get the job done.
The lightweight division is so fun. If back in England we have Paddy Pimblett, I personally would love to see that fight. He's similar to you in that he's a polarizing figure. Love him or hate him, he brings it.
He's a good kid, Paddy. The Scousers, you gotta love the Scousers. You know, my father was born in Liverpool. One side of my family is from there. So I got a lot of love for that part of the world.
As the dust settled around McGregor's online cheerleading, attention shifted to the chaotic buildup of the UFC 324 interim lightweight title fight. Ever since Ilia Topuria won the belt back in June, multiple contenders had been circling the #1 spot, and they all pushed their claims in very different ways. Justin Gaethje made his case with a dramatic twist, warning the UFC that he would walk away for good if he didn't get the next shot. Paddy Pimblett leaned heavily into the long-running tension he had with Topuria, hoping their bitter history would be enough to push him ahead of everyone else waiting in line. In the end, the UFC's decision surprised almost nobody at the top of the division, but irritated nearly everyone outside of it. Pimblett and Gaethje walked away happy. Fans, on the other hand, exploded with anger online. Many argued that Pimblett shouldn't leapfrog more active contenders, especially after only one recent win, a dominant performance over Michael Chandler, and no activity since. But despite the online backlash, Pimblett somehow climbed from number 8 into the top 5, all while sitting on the sidelines. For his supporters, it was a sign of star power. For his critics, it was proof that popularity had started to outweigh merit.
Ilia or Paddy? I mean, the fight not happening. It's Justin or Paddy now. Paddy got to get past Justin. Justin a tough fight, bro. I don't know. A lot of people sleeping on Justin on the Paddy fight, which makes me ridiculous.
Meanwhile, Arman Tsarukyan found himself right at the center of the storm. Only days earlier, he had walked into Qatar and submitted Dan Hooker with the kind of clinical sharpness that makes a contender undeniable. The win stretched his streak to 5 straight, put him in the ideal position to finally get a title shot, and appeared to leave absolutely no doubt that he was next in line for Topuria's belt. Tsarukyan had also made the effort to serve as the backup fighter for Topuria's championship win against Charles Oliveira earlier in the year, even though he ultimately wasn't needed. Yet despite the momentum, the consistency, and the effort, Tsarukyan found himself pushed aside as if none of that mattered. The UFC's memory seemed long enough to remember his late withdrawal from UFC 311, but short enough to forget everything he had done since returning. As soon as the UFC officially revealed Pimblett versus Gaethje for the interim belt in January, Tsarukyan's frustration burst out instantly. Fans echoed the same confusion, blasting the matchup as something that ignored the entire ranking system.
Arman Tsarukyan disappointed with Paddy Pimblett getting title shot. Arman Tsarukyan is still optimistic about getting a title fight in the future after the UFC announced Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje for the interim belt. Patience and hard work will penetrate everything, make it make sense. Tsarukyan also left a clown emoji under the UFC's post. Tsarukyan had recently said that he wouldn't even be surprised if Pimblett got a title shot over him.
Would you be surprised if Paddy Pimblett would get title shot earlier than you?
No.
Thank you.
The situation grew even more heated when Pimblett decided to take aim directly at Tsarukyan. For months, Tsarukyan had spoken openly about his belief that Pimblett didn't deserve a title shot and had only risen through the rankings through hype rather than accomplishment. When the UFC finally announced the interim title fight, Pimblett responded immediately with a mocking jab aimed straight at his Armenian rival. The message was loud and petty, exactly the kind of response fans expect from a fighter who relishes rivalry as much as he does competition.
This is what Paddy posted. Where's Arman crying? You said Arman was crying? Oh. That's childish, man. That is childish. That is so snake.
Even with all the tension swirling around him, Pimblett didn't seem fazed. He had bigger dreams in mind, dreams that extended far beyond championship gold. Even early in his UFC career, he talked openly about the idea of headlining a massive event at Liverpool's Anfield Stadium, something no UFC fighter had done. To him, walking out at the home of his beloved football club surrounded by his own people meant more than hoisting a belt. It was a personal milestone he valued above even becoming champion. While he still wanted a title reign for the legacy it could create, the thought of fighting at Anfield remained his top ambition, a moment that would define his identity more than any belt ever could.
Arman's a very good fighter, but no one cares about him. You know what I mean? People just look at him and think, yeah, you yourself to fight in Islam. You talk a big game, but you don't back it up. But everyone knows Justin Gaethje's a banger. You know what I mean? Everyone knows that if you're fighting Justin Gaethje, you're gonna have a fight. So, and he's a legend. You know what I mean? Arman isn't. So I'd love to fight another legend than Justin Gaethje.
Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett should not be for an interim title. So it was announced that Justin and Paddy will be fighting in January as UFC 324's headliner, and as much as I like this matchup, I have a problem with it being for an interim title. Because champion Ilia Topuria says he won't be fighting in the first quarter of 2026 due to personal reasons, so he expects to make his return around spring. So not only do I think that is not too long enough to warrant an interim title fight, but it also feels wrong to have this fight without Arman Tsarukyan in it. This is a belt for the third best fighter in the division, and honestly, it may not even be for the third best when we consider fighters like Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira. This is something the UFC did to appease Justin, who has basically said he's only fighting for UFC gold, and for Paddy, who the promotion wants to see become a champion. Overall, great fight, and I'm going to side with Paddy on this one as I think Justin is past his best days, but yeah, this should not be for an interim title. But what do you think?
But Pimblett wasn't the only topic stirring conversations. As soon as the interim title fight was announced, Ariel Helwani weighed in and didn't hold back. The veteran MMA commentator tore into the UFC's matchmaking decisions, expressing disbelief that the supposed top contender, Tsarukyan, had been completely excluded from a title fight. He pointed out that the matchup didn't even include the current champion, since Topuria wasn't recovering from some long injury layoff. According to Helwani, the only thing that made the fight feel legitimate was the entertainment value of the names involved, not the rankings or merit. He argued that the interim belt seemed meaningless under these conditions, more like a placeholder than a true step toward the divisional hierarchy.
Said to the public, it is not as important as an interim title fight. An interim title fight, by the way, that does not feature a number one contender. Because the number one contender at 155 pounds is a guy named Arman Tsarukyan, and he's not involved in this fight. And of course, the champion Ilia Topuria is not involved in this fight. This is a makeshift fight. This is as prestigious as a BMF title. God bless. I said I wanted to see Paddy fight for the belt. God bless. I said, Justin, I think you need to win a couple more. He said he was going to retire unless he got a title fight. I guess he's not retiring. He's fighting for an interim title. But this is a bogus fight. And it's insane to me that it is headlining over Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes. On paper, Paddy versus Justin, if Paddy wasn't fighting Ilia and Ilya's supposed to fight Arman, on paper, Paddy versus Justin is a fine fight to determine the number one contender to fight Ilia and or Arman. Ilia won that belt back in June. I don't even think you need an interim title fight. Honestly, it should have been the co-main event, 5-round, number one contender fight, Ilia versus Arman, second half of the year. What's the problem with that? And now what you just said, because he reiterated this in the Instagram Live, the winner of this fight is going to fight Ilia. What happens to Arman? Arman's going to have to fight who? What is going on? What does Arman Tsarukyan have to do to get a shot at the belt now?
Helwani also questioned why the fight was placed atop the card over the highly anticipated Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes matchup. From his perspective, Pimblett versus Gaethje should have been a clear number one contender fight, not an interim title bout. He believed the UFC could have simply booked Topuria against Tsarukyan later in the year, which would have kept everything clean and logical. Instead, the decision created a complicated mess, leaving Tsarukyan stuck in limbo while Pimblett and Gaethje stepped into a match manufactured title opportunity. With the UFC now promising the winner a shot at Topuria, Helwani wondered what was left for Tsarukyan to do besides continue scraping for opportunities that seem to keep slipping away.
And he's not even next, apparently. Now, of course, everything could change. Nothing really means anything. They make up the rules as they go along. But to put Justin and Paddy in the interim title slot and then have the winner of that fight Ilya is insane to me. And worse than that, because we have seen interim title fights that have felt a little fugazi. I cannot believe that they are headlining this card with that fight. And I cannot believe that you have Kayla versus Amanda Nunes, which some people may say is the biggest and most significant women's title fight of all time. I'm not going to forget about Nunes versus Cyborg. I'm not going to forget about Cyborg versus Genia. I'm not going to forget about all of Ronda Rousey's fights, Miesha Tate, Bethe Correia, Alexis Davis, on and on it goes. I'm not going to ignore Holly Holm, of course, the Nunes fight. I'm not even going to forget about Holly Holm versus Miesha Tate back at UFC 196, UFC 200, Nunes versus Tate, all that and then some. Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes is in that discussion, and when you factor in the return of Nunes, and you factor in the ATT storyline, teammates turn rivals, how in the world are you going to headline an interim title fight over that one? How are you going to put that beneath an interim title fight? And an interim title fight, once again, that does not feature the #1 contender. I mean, it's if I'm Nunes and Harrison, I'm happy, I'm getting paid, I'm fighting the UFC. I'm deep down insulted. I'm deep down insulted that they think this less of me.
But not everyone agreed that Tsarukyan had been wronged. Michael Bisping stepped in with a very different take. From his perspective, the UFC's matchmaking had been perfectly reasonable. He didn't see Tsarukyan as the rightful next man for the interim title, pointing out that the Armenian contender had spent too much time on the sidelines earlier in the year. To Bisping, Pimblett had already positioned himself strongly, especially after his heated moment inside the cage with Topuria earlier in the year when the two had nearly come to blows. Gaethje, despite the brutal knockout loss to Max Holloway at UFC 300, remained one of the division's most dangerous competitors with both wrestling and striking that could overwhelm anyone. Bisping argued that Gaethje's recent win over Rafael Fiziev reminded the world how sharp he still was, and Pimblett's destruction of Chandler cemented him as a rising force worthy of being in a marquee fight.
Obviously, he knows he's fighting in about 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks, whatever it is. So the man's ready, right? And he could be an interim champion of the world. Now, we know an interim champion basically means the #1 contender. But if Paddy can pull it off, unbelievable. That'll be 4 champs, 2 interims and 2 legit, well, 3 legit now with Tom being promoted from the UK that have become champions. And for Justin Gaethje, this is the final go. This is the final crack of the whip. The man's had 2 title fights in the past, Charles Oliveira to Khabib Nurmagomedov, and now he gets to go up against Paddy Pimblett. Now, talking about the matchup, of course, it is an easier fight for Justin than what it is against Khabib Nurmagomedov, one of the greatest of all time. Islam Makhachev, the current pound for pound, and according to many people, a man that is surpassing Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? So in that regard, it is an easier matchup. Will Paddy be able to take him down? Will he dance around the octagon? Yes, he will. Will he try and replicate the game plan of Max Holloway? Of course he will. Who wouldn't try and do that? You aren't going to stand and go toe-to-toe with Justin Gaethje because the man does have knockout power. But underestimate Paddy at your peril. That's all I'll say about that one, but that is a phenomenal fight.
As the lightweight division continued to unravel in controversy, another weight class found itself in the middle of its own messy debate. Alexander Volkanovski, one of the most respected champions in the sport, had his own storyline playing out at featherweight. After reclaiming the title against Diego Lopes in a hard-fought bout earlier in the year, Volkanovski looked ready to defend again sooner rather than later. He wanted a December fight, and in his mind, Lerone Murphy was the clear and obvious choice. Murphy had just delivered a spectacular spinning elbow knockout against Aaron Pico, giving him the type of highlight that typically earns a fighter a title shot. But the UFC had different plans. Instead of Murphy or Movsar Evloev, another undefeated deserving contender, the company pushed for a rematch between Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. Volkanovski was surprised by the decision, especially since his first victory over Lopes had been convincing. But as a champion who never shies away from competition, he didn't complain. He simply accepted the matchup, even though he felt Murphy and Evloev had earned the opportunity more.
Is it more deserving people, whatnot? everybody knows that I'll fight anyone, right? So whoever they put in front of me, I'll do. But there was them questions there, and then we're waiting. We're going to do Sydney because that's the only reason why I waited, because I thought it'd be December. But then they're like, "I will give you Sydney." I'm like, "All right, I'll wait for that." Then it was looking like it wasn't going to happen, but then it did happen, which was great. But a lot happened. And obviously, again, I thought, it was a Mobzar deserving. Lerone Murphy. I thought they were the two guys. They're the guys I called out. UFC really won Lopez. But at least everyone knows they're in for a treat. It's going to be a very exciting fight. With your Mobzars and Lerones, they're probably, they're more deserving. But are they going to bring the fight like Lopez would? I think the fans are going to appreciate the fight that me and Lopez are going to have. But it is what it is. Whoever they put in front of me, let's go.
Lopes, for his part, didn't hold back when defending his second shot at the belt. Many fans questioned how he had jumped ahead of undefeated fighters after only one win, but Lopes explained that fighters needed to take risks and accept the matchups presented to them if they wanted to earn the UFC's trust. In his eyes, he had done exactly that. He also hinted that the UFC appreciated fighters who stepped up whenever called upon, implying that those who turned down opportunities were essentially removing themselves from consideration.
Alexander Volkanovski vs Diego Lopez 2 is a joke. So it was announced that Volk will be returning to defend his featherweight title against the man he beat in his last fight, Diego Lopez, and this is absolutely insane. Sure, Diego bounced back with a win in his last fight, but I still think he needs one more before getting another shot at the title, especially when we have legitimate contenders in Lerone Murphy and Movsar Evloev. I get that the UFC wanted Volk to headline this card since it'll be in Australia, and they also wanted to give him a more favorable matchup against someone he fought and defeated before, but this is truly ruining the featherweight division, which at one point used to be one of the best divisions. But Volk's second title reign has kind of ruined that, as he's not fighting the best guys, and he's also not fighting very often compared to before. But what do you think?
Murphy, however, was crushed by the decision. Missing out on the chance to fight one of the greatest featherweights in history hit him hardest. He had dreamed of stepping into the octagon against a legend like Volkanovski, especially after building momentum with a knockout that put the whole division on notice. But in his view, the UFC had shifted away from prioritizing skill and accomplishment. He felt the sport had become more about who could draw attention rather than who had earned the position.
It just keeps getting better and better. Alexander Volkanovski is going to be defending his belt against Diego Lopez in the immediate rematch for Volk, since he hasn't fought actually since the first Lopez fight. Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, I really do not like Lopez getting this title shot. Like, yeah, he's a fun, entertaining fighter. He's one of the most exciting fighters in the featherweight division, if not the most exciting, but yet you're going to give him an undeserved title shot off beating the number 10 ranked Gene Silva. Like, if since the first Volkanovski fight, if Diego went out and had like 2 or 3 fights since then sure, fair enough. I could maybe see him getting a title shot, but he's coming off one win against not even a top 5 ranked contender, where Movsar is the clear number 1 contender, and instead they're making Volk defend the belt against the same guy. Like, the thing is with a fight like this is I have no reason to believe that anything's going to be different, right? It hasn't even been a year since their first fight yet. What changes is Diego Lopez going to make? It's going to be the exact same sort of stylistic fight. The only difference is that Volk's going to be a little bit older, potentially a little bit chinnier, maybe a little bit slower, and maybe Diego has improved a little bit. So it's going to make people think that Diego has a chance of winning. Let me tell you something. I think that Volkanovski is going to win the exact same way he did the first time. And that's because I haven't seen anything enough between these two guys to say that this fight's going to be drastically different, especially because it's been less than a year. So unless Volkanovski woke up and is like 80 years old now and can hardly move, and Diego Lopez has all of a sudden got the head movement of a prime Mike Tyson, then nah, bro. Nothing about this fight should change stylistically.
What makes the situation even more chaotic was how similar it feels to the Pimblett and Tsarukyan controversy. In both cases, the division's most qualified contenders are pushed aside in favor of fighters with bigger fan bases or stronger narratives. Pimblett and Lopez aren't the top-ranked options, but their popularity and storylines push them into center stage. Tsarukyan and Murphy, despite all their hard work, end up watching from the sidelines while the UFC constructed matchups that leaned more toward entertainment value than strict competitive order. In a sport where attention is currency, that alone might explain why things ended up the way they did.